Good afternoon, everybody. Shalom. Welcome to part 4 of Jews of the Old West. Today concludes a fall finale. That's right. Thank you. Yes, our fall scenario, our fall finale. Say that 10 times fast, right? And Jews of the Old West is part of Who Knew, an exploration of the Jewish experience, sponsored by Jewish Nevada. And we do want to thank them for their support, as well as the support of our Temple Sinai Board of Directors, our president, Tova McGilvray, and of course, our sheriff in town, Rabbi Benjamin Zober. Today, we are going to be visiting a little house that happens to be on the prairie. So I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Ben, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us. Yes, we will be watching A Little House on the Prairie, which is a show that I think most people are very familiar with, whether they watch the show or if they read the books or both. This is another really, I think, a really lovely little episode. And I hope those of you who are familiar with the show and can speak to some of those things will share some thoughts, especially with those who have not seen so many episodes, because we've had some where people weren't familiar with the show so much or as familiar with it to really be able to talk about the characters. But here, we feel like these are members of our own family sometimes, because we is such of the show. So I won't give too much. We'll get to it, and then talking. And as usual, I'll provide a couple of some things I've kind of uncovered about some of the people involved with it. Anyone who's watching online, what we're going to do is we hope that you'll keep the stream going. We're going to go blank. We're not going to broadcast from here because we don't want to run afoul of the copyright and YouTube overlords. But there is a link available where you can watch the episode as well, and we will come back together at about 2:00. And we'll have our conversation. So if we may have a few extra minutes in between. So if people need a bathroom break or anything like that, we've got space for that. But without further ado, I will say see you in a short while for those online. And here we will get started with an episode called The Craftsman.
That's what you call me. But the reruns are always on.
Yes.
That's right.
But I happen to have the DVDs with
DVDs are the VCR.
the DVDs.
Holes.
Very cool.
Yeah. Holes. Very awesome show.
Yeah, you could have
You know, good balance.
asked her.
They would teach
Probably
you
had
lessons
DVD.
somewhere.
He's more one of them.
All of us.
He was a good one.
I just want to remind you, if you're commenting, hold the mic. We should all be used to this by now. We're pros.
We're getting there with it. All right. So, any first thoughts on that, Marilyn? Please.
I was a little surprised by his sister.
Yeah.
She was going along with the hate because the other kids were, and that was totally out of character for her. She it was a learning lesson because Pa explained everything and she changed, but her initial reaction was totally out of character for her.
Interesting.
I just wanted to say, I heard him use the word snore. Now I know what that means, but most people watching that show would know what that meant.
Right. Yeah, a schnorrer is. Yeah, he gave a little bit of a.
He defined it when he was planting the seed.
Yeah, I
to
think he
grow
said what
another
someone who
tree.
takes and doesn't give back.
Right. So he did
Um,
define it prior to the next time he used it.
Yeah, and I think part of so that sort of words that everyone knows or does not know was something that figured in. I think there was a story. I want to say that it was Michael Landon was in a car with a bunch of people, and he told a joke, and it had some Jewish concept or Yiddish term in it or something like that, and everyone laughed, but no one got the joke. They just knew that he was the boss, and so they laughed. They laughed because they thought they were supposed to, and I think that was kind of a like a light bulb moment for him on this.
In the show?
No, this was just a story that was told about. It was told about Michael Landon. So
Oh,
I think
not in the show.
no, not in the
Oh.
show. No. Because we all know now that Michael Landon was Jewish. Does anyone know his original name? It in no way resembles. I think he got Michael Landon out of a phone book, literally. It's a Eugene Maurice Orowitz. Yeah, I know you knew that, Ken. Tip of our tongues. But he was Michael Landon, and so Michael Landon, and he'd been in television for a number of years, and almost nobody knew that he was Jewish. And then someone encouraged Paul Wolf, who wrote this episode, to approach him about this thing he was working on. And all he had at that point was that it was a story about a guy who built coffins without using any nails. And he starts talking with Michael Landon about this, and Michael Landon says, "Are you a Jew?" "I'm a Jew." And he had been trying in some ways to make his Jewishness more public. And I guess, at least according to some of the things I thought, that this was sort of his way of announcing it to the world, that this episode was key in that. I looked through the other things that Paul Wolf wrote. He had a pretty good career as a screenwriter, ended up, I think, eventually teaching at USC. He's still alive, by the way. But I don't think that any of the other stuff he wrote had Jewish content. I tried looking through a few episodes here and there of various other shows, and from what I could see, none of them had any of that. They were just sort of general appeal. But we're glad I thought this was a little gem of an episode. Yeah, John Luis.
Thank you, Rabbi, for giving that little background on Michael Landon, because I was just thinking the symbolism that we saw in the first scene was the acorn, and that continued through there. And I kept thinking, okay, acorns symbolizes growth, but also renewal, rejuvenation. So I think it just really kind of symbolizes a lot with the story, and then what the story you just mentioned about
Yeah,
telling the
yeah.
story, and Michael Landy being a producer, the actor, director of kind of rejuvenation on that as well.
Yeah, I like that.
What hit me most about the episode is here we are in the middle of kind of nowhere on the prairie and widespread anti-Semitism. Why?
Yeah. Well, well, honestly, I think, in part it's for the story because it works that way. I mean, there was anti-Semitism. It follows us around. What we from what I've seen that in the West or on the frontier and in prairie, these sort of places, that it was more person to person than like a widespread systemic thing, right? And I think this episode did a nice job of kind of doing that, because you had some folk who were showing it, right? The initial scene in the store, even difference between a husband and wife, right? She's saying all these things, and he's just kind of like, I take people as I get them. And I think that, and then other people who are much more, tolerant of it or indifferent, right? So we kind of get the whole spread. And I think that's more typical. I mean, people were living a hard scrabble life. They generally didn't have time to be really working on their hatred and bigotry, which is not to say that it was a paradise for Jews and minorities, but I think things would get sort of passed on. People would hear things and they would repeat it, but it wasn't so much a way of life, or that people came in and the entire town would say no Jews are welcome here, as kind of the trend. So I'd say Judy.
It was interesting that starting in the very beginning, the music of the Yiddish song "Oifen Perpetchik" at the fireplace, and then later when he was humming while he was making the coffin, he was actually singing "Oifen Perpetchik."
Yeah.
But what you said though, when they came in to the store at the beginning, and that one man said, "Oh, here comes the heap, hold on to your wallet." It was just interesting that trope drifted into the prairie already at that time. Yeah.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I mean, we were a lot of the Jews are greedy, Jews are, take your money, kind of came from our connection to commerce and finance. So if that's people, and being a Jewish merchant was and maybe always will be sort of a part of the culture. I mean, it's part of immigrant culture, right? You get a little bit. Oh, I've got something, I can sell this something maybe for something more, and if I'm shrewd in it, you can expand out. So it's not completely out of bounds or out of line with the way Jews are. I think here we get that he's a craftsman, right? And I kind of liked that we had something other than just the Jewish merchant coming through, because there's an episode of, well, I should say I was of two minds about it. One was maybe I'd like to show the Jewish peddler coming through and all of that. There's an episode of Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. One of the producers of that show actually was Jewish. You may know him, Andy Hill, or you may know his son Aaron. Yes. His dad apparently was pretty far removed from the actual writing and planning and all that. Otherwise, I would have been soaking him for information and insights long ago. But there's an episode of that show where a peddler comes into town, Jewish peddler, and of course, the local general store, the guy there is very unhappy that this Jewish person is coming in, has probably better products, better prices, all of that, because he's had a monopoly, and why put out anything decent when you have everyone's business? And there's all sorts of anti-Semitism going on with that he's an outsider, he's greedy, he's all those sorts of things. And it ends up, I think I don't remember if they burn his cart or they trash it and that sort of thing. And Dr. Quinn comes to the rescue because she's perfect and overly virtuous and unnecessarily tolerant and kind, and convinces everyone of the error of their ways, and they all learn a valuable lesson for Christmas, I think. Literally, I think it's Christmas. And I thought I could show that, but it felt too. Where I thought this one, we have a little bit of that. We have anti-Semitism. We see people saying things, actually saying the word Jew and and demonstrating that. But then we have a little twist on that, and I think we've all kind of gotten the notion Jews sell things. Okay, so I thought certainly for this audience, which I assume most of you have met a couple Jewish people in your life, we didn't necessarily need to watch through that. But yeah, Jews is greedy. I think that's one that. It sort of goes with that territory. But in the same way that it's an easy hatred, right? It's ready-made, and I think honestly that's one of the reasons why it persists, right? Why work hard if you're looking for a scapegoat? Like, don't put extra effort into it. We have just the ready-made tropes, and that's why we always see the same things. They just get repackaged, right? I mean, that was if I may, among other things, Hitler wasn't creative in his prejudices. He just came up with new ways to sell it. It goes on today. There are people who are finding all sorts of new ways to peddle their bigotry and hatred. So thank you for being patient.
I want to mention that Mr. Larrabee was a very nasty man. He'd been in several episodes. And when they needed someone in town to spout off the hatred of Jews, they picked someone that it made sense because he hated everybody.
Okay. So, right. Well, so I'm gonna you should just keep it. I'm gonna put this back to you. So there is another episode. There are other episodes that have Jewish content, and I wonder if Marilyn, if you could share a little bit with and sort of even tie it to this one, perhaps.
It turns out that Nellie.
For those of us who don't remember, which one was Nellie?
Nellie is the shop owner's daughter. She was the blonde with the curly hair.
So she's the blonde who was really kind of mean, and she's the daughter of
very mean and scared of the horns. It turns out she falls in love with a Jewish man and marries him.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That was the other episode I was considering. Or one of them.
He completely changes her. She turns into a very nice person. Her mother does not. And she gets pregnant with twins. And his parents come to visit the birth of the babies. And there's one boy and one girl. And the two sets of parents have this huge argument. Are the children Jewish or not? And what they end up doing is the boy is and the girl isn't.
Ken, yeah. Also to add a little bit to that, do you remember? So her husband, he changes his name. Do you remember his original name?
No, I don't.
It's Isaac, same as the craftsman. So
And in the show, he changes his name.
we find out that he, when his parents show up, they call him by the name they gave him. They're Isaac, and like, who's this Isaac? And right, which is another layer of like, who are you? Because that's part of the episode is his. He's a little meek, and the fact that he's with a wife who has some very, very strong will, and that he's surrounded by a lot of people who are very, very opinionated and forceful. And then his parents show up, and and they are kind of domineering in their way and set in their ways, and his in-laws, and but we sort of see it that he is how he is sort of this like I said, meek, kind of cowed guy, but then forced to to then assert his voice and say who he is, and it's kind of a lovely moment. But also that that he, for his reasons, decided he didn't want to be Isaac anymore, and his parents are not terribly fond of that particular choice. So
He actually changed his name because the profession he was in would not have accepted him with a Jewish name. He came in and helped solve problems. He trained Nellie how to cook and run a restaurant.
yeah. Any other ideas, Mark? Yeah.
I also was impressed with the going to New York to get a bride, and how appropriate it is for, like, you hear about people from Indian cultures still arranging their kids to go come back with a bride. But it must have been really interesting on the frontier for someone from New York City to get used to living in the prairie.
Yeah, that does present a challenge when there's not a lot of when you're looking to practice endogamy and there are not a lot of other folks around, and bringing people over from the old country. I mean, right, was common. I mean, here, it was, they had found someone for him, and we're gonna, send her over. There's actually there's a show, it was called Here Come the Brides. Oh, people remember this one. I'd never heard of it. Boy, was I in for a treat. But the premise, for those of you who don't know this one, was that sort of playing on that there are not a lot of women out in the frontier of the prairie, and through some sort of convoluted thing, these two guys get a bunch of women out and put them up, kind of have like a boarding house for them, and are supposed to marry them all off to the loggers and other guys out there, which I'm sure was not as creepy as it sounded when it was made. But there is an episode where one of the women kind of says, "I've had enough. I'm Jewish, and I want to marry someone who's Jewish, and so I'm out of here." And I guess part of the challenge is they had to marry all of the women off, or they lose their property. I don't know. Anyway, there's one guy that they discover who's known to in the camp, one of the kind of like local guys who's Jewish, and they try to set them up, and it goes horribly. And of course, by the end, they fall in love, but it just. When was that one on? That was in the 70s, 80s. It's a strange. Yeah, it was very odd. It was a very, very odd episode. We could do another season of this, and we could watch some of these episodes that didn't make the initial cut, because my goodness.
Just kind of going back to the horrible bigotry and the trope. A question is that horrible trope about Jews having horns.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? Because I have a friend as Jewish. She's about my mother's age, and she said she moved to a small town in Southern California when she was young, and the farmers and so forth asked her, "Can we see your horns?" And when she told me that, I was like, "What?" Yes. So anyhow, I just wanted to inquire about that.
Oh, you want to take this one, Judy?
I want to just give a personal story about that. I grew up in New York City, and I leave to go to college in upstate New York. I'm up at Cornell, and one of the women in my suite was from a small town outside of Watkins Glen, and we became very good friends, and she wasn't Jewish. And one weekend she invited me home, and I went back with her, and we go to the local pub or whatever. And this is true. She introduced me. This is my friend Jill from the dorm, and she's Jewish and has no horns. And that's for real in the 1970s.
In Italy, I think it's in Rome, there is a very famous statue of Moses in one of the piazzas. I cannot remember. I will have to check it out and let you all know. And I'm trying to remember who this famous sculptor is. It is an enormous statue of Moses, and Moses has horns.
Yes.
Do you know?
I want to say it's Michelangelo.
It could be it's extremely famous.
Yes.
Translation.
Yeah, it's a mistranslation. So there, the Torah says it talks about rays of light coming from his head, and I believe the word is used is keren, which can also be translated as horns. And from that, this emerged, and see if this turns on, because I have the image of it. It should come up in a moment. Yeah, that's exactly it. From that one. Well, a couple things I'll just to say and not to do you one better, but I know people who are my age who have also encountered that same stereotype. People who've said they've gone play. There we go. There we go. We've got the image there. You can see he's got those. Boop, there you go. Who needs a pointer? I got that. My synagogue growing up had a wooden reproduction of the top of that statue, either that one or one similar to it, and had the horns.
And it's Michelangelo.
Yeah, that's a Michelangelo. Yeah.
I remember seeing it. I was thinking,
No, that's the origin of all that.
When we were, I think it's in Rome, and there it is in this giant piazza for
Yeah.
all to see. Moses with horns.
No, just the horns. But that's I mean, Michelangelo was capitalizing on the mistranslation, but when artists perpetuate this sort of thing, like it adds to that sort of thing, right? I don't think most people are such art scholars that they're looking and going like, oh, well, that is a Jewish fellow, and I notice he has horns. But Michelangelo, I think he falls into that same thing. He has heard the same piece. My recollection is that it's Karen, and that it's rays of light, right? Because Moses's face after he sees it's like that's why he wears the mask, right? Like when people are like, oh, masking is against my religion, like Moses wore a mask. I don't know. That it's the rays of light coming from his face or his head, and it's either the same or similar to one of the words. I thought it was Karen for horns, and that's how I mean, right? Which is just to underscore. This is why when we do Torah study on our Saturday mornings on Zoom, 10 o'clock to noon, we are really, really zealous about what does the text say? What are these words? And sometimes we don't know, and sometimes what we've been told is completely wrong. I would say almost every week, right? We go over something and we go, wait a minute, why did they use that word? That doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, John Louise.
I was just going to say, add to that, Rabbi Ben, is that there was a discussion about how always question, and
Yeah.
that's just basically what we do in Torah study and what we do, always question things. And so it's like trying to seek the truth. So I thought that was kind of interesting what you just mentioned right there, and it was mentioned a few times there in that episode.
I'm misunderstanding what you said about Karen, because isn't there also the Hebrew institution Karen
yes.
Kayemet,
Yes.
which is a charitable organization?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's essentially JNF. I apologize for not chasing down the right word to have the right word and the right spelling. But so please don't quote me on the Karen or Kerem being the word, but it is from the rays of light. Oh, John Willis, you've got a.
The Hebrew word for horn is Karen. I just looked on Google. It says the Hebrew word for horn is Karen. However, Karen has multiple meanings, including ray, the word for X-rays, and so forth. So, so power of strength, container, shofar, So this is interesting.
So
Keren,
Yeah.
they spell it.
so yeah,
I wanted to comment on the show.
please.
And as the fourth one we've seen, I think it was one of the only ones that really used the word Jew.
Yeah.
And ironically, it also had the least amount of Jewish symbolism as far as artifacts.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like the other ones relied on items and objects to say it. This one just came out and said it. And
That's
and I
interesting,
thought
yeah.
it was interesting also that there was all the anti-Semitism and the hatred, but on the opposite side of that was this gentleman who was teaching very good lessons to the young man. And it was
Yeah.
almost like a juxtaposition of, well, wait a minute, is he worthy of being hated because he's saying nice stuff?
Yeah.
So
Well,
that was
yeah.
interesting too. But what really struck me a lot was that you didn't see menorahs, you didn't see mezuzahs, except for lighting the candles.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that you never even saw him. There was that one scene at the candles where you saw a kippah. Otherwise, he always wore the hat. And you didn't have him wearing his prayer shawl. In the others, it was
yeah.
very abundant to say, this person is Jewish. And in this case, they just said, he's a Jew.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't have the I don't know, I haven't had the time or the inclination. I haven't had the time or the energy to do a real study of things, but I suspect that in the early representations of Jews and depictions of Jews on TV seemed those ones that were laden with let's cram everything we can in.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think over time we kind of go in a different direction, right? We might have more, we might have better content, but it doesn't need to, right? Or better content or more, right? They can say Jew, but they're not going to be, emptying out the prop closet to sort of drive home that point. Because honestly, most of what you see, a lot of the things you see more recently are truncated or very abbreviated Jewish things, right? They'll get up and they'll say, they won't even say the whole prayer. Like it's not that long. We have some really long prayers, and they don't do that. Whereas like the Goldbergs, my favorite episode of the Sad Day, they show the entirety of singing Kol Nidre. Uncut, just in one continuous kind of thing, and now what we get for most of the things is just this very brief, just right. They put their hands up, or they say half, Baruch atah Adonai, something that trails off, or in a number of cases there's nothing. There's a bunches of episodes where they're dealing with something Jewish, but they don't show anything Jewish. There's a bat mitzvah episode of one show, and I don't think I think they talk about there being a bat mitzvah, and then they get to the party, and that's what they're doing with it. And there's not even the like showing the kids standing up on the bima, like and the old rabbi, and then like okay we're done, right? We've covered the Jewish thing. Let's move on. So it's there definitely seems to be this sort of evolution, but at the same time also knowledge, right? That they don't need to hammer us with, let me show you all the Jewish things there are to drive home this point. It's, oh, this guy's Jewish, like, and they can. So
It also had a much more elaborate soundtrack than the others. Jewish
Sure.
Jewish music.
all
This was a lot more in-depth soundtrack than the others had.
Although to be fair, use of that song was slightly anachronistic because the show takes place in about 1870. The song wasn't written until 1890. Wasn't popularized till Sholem Aleichem wrote the liner notes for the for one of the collections. But it's a great song, so sure.
When he was lying in bed at the very end talking to Michael Landon, to Paul, didn't he ask him to send his prayer shawl to
Yes.
his son? So it was
Yeah.
mentioned but
So,
not
yeah.
shown.
Yeah, good catch.
The prayer shawl was
It's just
hanging
kinda-
on
yeah,
a
it's kinda
peg or
back.
something over by the door. So he kind of referred to it without them making it really obvious. And he did have a kippah on his head when he was in bed,
Yeah.
hiding his horns.
Yes.
I was just wondering if anyone had, I'm still confused why the episode with the two kids and the horns and they go running away and there was like nothing else following that up. Did it just like make the point that it was ludicrous, or I'm wondering why nothing else, like they didn't go home crying to mom and dad or telling their friends
Yeah.
I saw the horns or something.
Yeah, we don't really
Just
know
like
what's on the
stop.
otder end. Like, did that reaffirm? Like, oh my God, that's true,
Yeah.
or did they realize that they'd been had?
Yeah.
And kind of, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Maybe that's a problem, right? That's right. That's the thing. If we want to highlight someone's ignorance through humor or mockery, there is the risk that people will go, see, it's true, right? Which I think is one of those things that when we look at things like, Mel Brooks and Woody Allen and people who are kind of playing with those things, like, are they reinforcing the stereotype, or are they casting light on it, right? That's always the problem with satire, right? If you were to, I may have said, if you watched All in the Family when it was on, you laughed at Archie Bunker because he was an exaggeration, because you could laugh with his bigotry. But I guarantee you, if you were to show that to someone, to even to someone my age, we go, wasn't everyone that racist in the 60s? Like, we see the videos of the fire hoses and of all those sorts of things, and we assume that was the way it was, in the same way that people read Mark Twain and go, but people talk that way then, this is racist. And no, Twain was making fun of these people. He was exaggerating it. He was drawing it out. He was drawing attention to it. Yes, there were racists and there were people who said those things, but he is putting it in a particular way. But that gets lost with time, right? In the same way that if someone were to watch, like Stephen Colbert, when on his show, he was satirizing Fox News and right-wing news. But I guarantee you that in 10, 15 years, even if someone were to watch that and not know that he was poking fun at those people, they'd go, oh, like, yeah, Bill O'Reilly and Stephen Colbert and Sean Hannity, they're all in the same sort of thing. So we run that same risk that when we make fun of these sorts of things, that someone's not going to get the joke. And just think like, oh, well, see, yes, Jews are, here are Jews showing how Jews are greedy, or here are Jews showing that this sort of thing, and it's lost. I think they just sort of felt like they'd played that out for the sake of the show. And perhaps that we know that it did have an effect, because in the end, she's going to marry someone who's Jewish, and presumably didn't say that when she first met him, like, oh, you're Jewish. Please don't stab me with your giant horns. I think that's about all that. I'm dropping everything. What do you got? Downstairs neighbors will be very upset. I think that's about all that I have for this sort of bit. This episode was 1979. So it's about 45 years old now. Crazy. The one other thing that I thought that was kind of interesting, I never really kind of put together until this viewing of it, was there was sort of there was definitely something about fathers or father figures and the different relationships, right? That Isaac, his relationship with his son, and his son going away, and I don't want to leave you, right? And that whole conversation about about that, and then seeing Albert, right? And Albert's his Pa as his father, and his respect for him and deference to him, and the way that they related to one another, and then Isaac stepping in and being a kind of a father figure as well. And I thought that was really interesting and lovely kind of construction, and just some of the values that the show is sharing. So unless there's anything else, I thank you all for joining. And as I said, if people would want to do a second, we're going to do more of this sort of thing. I don't know necessarily on the theme, but there are certainly more episodes. There were more either of the shows we watched or some of these other ones we didn't. I thought these were kind of the best. But if people are interested in looking at some of the other ones, I'm sure we can find a time for that and explore them as well.
You can be the focus group because Rabbi Ben and I are going to work on season 2 for next year. That'll commence around Rosh Hashanah time next year. How many of you would be interested in doing this with other shows? Yeah, everybody. You'd be on Zoom, but yeah, okay. So then when we sit down, we'll have to think about it. Yeah, great. Terrific. And again, just a reminder, January 26th, Rabbi Ben will be speaking with Michael Gordon, and it'll be in recognition of International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So we'll be doing that here. February 16th, Rabbi Sarah will be doing Jewish love songs. And March will be Barbara Weinberg, who will be meeting us at Sinai. And then following that in April will be Daryl Dworkin about Jews in the toy industry. So we won't be together again until January. But I did want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. Lots to be thankful for this year especially. And I'm thankful to Rabbi Ben for putting all this together and to Michael Gordon for bringing it home to everybody and for always being here for all the logistics. Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jill. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. So we look forward to seeing you in 2025 and finding out who knew. Oh, and there's refreshments, of course, because how could there not be?